Welcome, everybody. Has been a very interesting conference, the African Philanthropy Conference, and we had lots to discuss. And I thought, you know what, just to wind up and round up everything that has been talked about, the plenary sessions and everything in Victoria Falls. Let's actually have Mkoma Briggs. And thank you very much, Mkoma Briggs. This is the second time you're actually on the show.
No, it's a pleasure. It's a pleasure to be talking to you again. Yeah. Look forward to sharing about the conference.
Yeah. So what we want to talk about, so the other guys have actually done a lot of work for you. They've gone into the philosophy, they've gone into the history, they've gone into the future, they've talked about AI, they've talked about, so we've got lots of material. But what we want to talk about is actually how this conference actually started and what's the aim, and is this year better than last? Yeah,
so obviously this is the 5th edition of the African Philanthropy Conference. We are holding it under the theme, the Next Frontiers of African Philanthropy Conference. And our sense is that the world is at a critical moment of transition, where you have all these big questions before us. And everyone is asking, how do we move from where we are to, from our perspective, a more just society? The systems that have taken us to, that have governed the world, let's say since the end of the Second World War, are very challenged. You can look at it in terms of global governance. You look at what's happening within the United Nations framework, where the UN fails to handle critical peace and security questions, whether we're talking about Sudan, we're talking about the Middle East, or even conflict in Europe. You can look at what's happening with regards to the global financial architecture itself. People like Macron have become famous now for convening conversations on reimagining a new global financial architecture. So we are at a moment where the mechanisms and the systems that have provided answers to global governance and stability have exhausted their capacity to be responding to the questions of the day.
Okay.
And everyone is therefore looking for that, what's next. So for us, this is what informed the theme of the next frontiers of African philanthropy. Because we are saying, how is African philanthropy going to play a role? How is African philanthropy going to be relevant in finding answers to the most pressing questions of the day? How do we have African philanthropy being relevant to solving democracy and governance questions in our countries? How do we have African philanthropy being relevant to solving climate change questions that our countries and the continent and the globe is facing? How do we have African philanthropy being relevant to dealing with the whole emerging issues and dynamics around artificial intelligence? How do you have African philanthropy being relevant to the global shifts that I spoke about? So these are actually the key plenary. We've organized plenary sessions around the questions that I've just run through: climate justice, climate change, green resourcing, artificial intelligence, global shifts, because we believe that African philanthropy can play a role, but we need to have the moment that we are having here as a community, as an ecosystem. We've got more than 350 people.
Delegates.
Here.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, from more than
That's
50
impressive.
countries.
Really?
Some people from Europe, from the US.
Well, that's something to cheer about. What are you actually drinking? That's.
I know. I am going to.
Well, I thought you're having your.
I'll get there.
You'll get there.
I'll get there.
All right. Okay. But yeah.
I'll get there. Yeah.
well done. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's taken,
And is
it's
this,
taken a lot.
what was it like, the fourth session and the fifth edition? The fourth edition to the fifth edition. What's the progress like? How many delegates did you have then?
Yeah, so first let me say so it's a collective effort. It's ourselves as Trust Africa, where I serve as the Director of Programs. It's CAPSI. Professor Moyo was just here.
Yes.
He's the Director of CAPSI at the Wits Business School. It's African Philanthropy Network. It's East Africa Philanthropy Network. It's Southern Africa Trust. It's African Philanthropy Forum as the co-conveners for this. And this year we also brought in what's an institution known as the Zambia Governance Foundation. They're just across the river in Livingstone. So it's a collective effort of all these partners. Last year, for the fourth edition, we were in Dakar, Senegal.
Oh, right, okay.
Our
so
numbers,
you travel right across the continent?
We move it across the continent. We try to. So we were in Dakar, Senegal. We again had a really, great event, but our numbers maybe were like less by 100 or so.
Oh, really? Okay.
So this is bigger.
Well, we must officially thank you because we're actually having it here in Zimbabwe, in Victoria Falls. Great for our tourism. Great way in which we can actually showcase Victoria Falls. So
definitely.
Thank you very much for that.
Definitely. In fact, this afternoon we took about 300 people across to Livingstone, working with the tour operators here, so that's business for them. And we took everyone on boat cruises so that we could have conversations whilst appreciating the gifts of nature in this environment.
The sunsets are incredible down the Zambezi.
Sunset, people were able to see wildlife, game on the river. I mean, it's amazing. And so you're right that there is actually a net positive return in terms of the money that's flowing into this economy as a result of this conference. It's something that we are quite happy about.
Oh, fantastic. Okay, so I suppose then it's what's going to happen next. So when are you going to have it next year? Or?
So we are going to wrap up tomorrow with a keynote from one of our most eminent thinkers, not just in terms of Zim now, but great recognition on the continent. My brother Brian Kagoro.
Yeah, we had Brian.
Yeah.
Phenomenal. Oh yeah.
Okay, fantastic. So
phenomenal guy.
He's giving the keynote tomorrow to close off this particular conference, and he's again looking at what he's calling philanthro transformations. The transformations that need to happen in philanthropy, informed by African philanthropy.
Okay.
So after that, we are then going to be announcing the venue for the conference next year. But the trend, the trajectory since the first edition has been upwards. So we are not expecting anything less than that. We're expecting that next year will be
even bigger.
An elevation. We've set the pace. One of the most special things for this year was us having Mama Gracia Machel sit with us from the very beginning until the end. We even went with her on the trip we took to Livingstone and the boat cruise, and I was privileged to sit with her in the captain's cabin and
lovely.
Just hear stories from the liberation struggle, just the sacrifices, the commitment, the determination that her generation had in terms of advancing the liberation not only of Mozambique but of the the wider continent. And she was sharing a lot of stories, from that time throughout her involvement with different civic formations, all the way up to her recent trip to Rome back in May, as part of what the Pope is organizing in terms of being human. Is the initiative that is there. So it's her presence with us, and just her generosity in terms of giving her time, giving her experience, her knowledge, sharing everything that she's been sharing.
That was something I was going to touch on.
That has just been
phenomenal, right?
Incredible.
Yeah. So that's something that I was going to touch on. Is you had extremely illustrious individuals, which is phenomenal because you're touching right across from Nigeria to South Africa, and there's that interplay, the Pan-Africanism that we usually talk about, and this is a cross-pollination of ideas.
Yeah. In fact, that is the aspiration of the conference, to create a space for an inclusive conversation. So as you're saying, we've really had, the presence of eminent, personalities or people, and when I say eminent, I really mean in terms of their contribution and longevity, in terms of contributing to advancing African philanthropy and the causes that African philanthropy support from different angles. So from academia, we had the head of the Wits Business School with us here.
Yeah, Professor Robert was just, he was brilliant.
You spoke to him
we had a conversation with him, and it's phenomenal, right? Yeah, the access to so many people.
So people like him, we have Professor Tade who's just done phenomenal work. In fact, he was the recipient of the Lifetime Achievement Award in African philanthropy. He's done incredible work. He's one of the founding.
And kudos to actually recognize him. And his efforts.
We think it's important for us to recognize our own as a continent, those who are contributing, so that we can follow the example. We can look at what they have modeled, and we follow, that example. So it was just incredible that we will be able to honor him in this way. And I was looking at him, I was seated, next close to him last night as we were doing the ceremony. He was in tears, he was crying, just seeing all those testimonies running through.
I thought what his daughters had to say was very touching.
Exactly.
That was a very special moment.
His family, his daughters, his wife, his son. It was just incredible, and he didn't know that. He didn't expect to see that.
Oh wow!
That all had happened behind the scene. But he was very moved. He was very touched. But he deserves it because he's contributed so much.
I imagine.
In space.
Yeah.
So it's people like him. It's people like Jerry, who you also spoke to.
Yeah, I had a conversation with him. Yeah.
Just incredible, phenomenal people. People like Madam Theo Soa. A lot of people that you've not been able to speak to, and it's a diverse ecosystem representing some of the biggest foundations that are there. Globally, and then representing some of what you can call philanthropy support organizations. Then people coming from research institutions, people coming from actually, students of this discipline, coming from various academies, people coming from civil society, as you can put it that way, who are actually pushing and being at, who are at the coalface of the issues that we are championing, we are pushing.
Well, it's a phenomenal agenda, and I suppose just to tie everything, how does one become involved in African philanthropy? And even the next conference, what does one have to do to participate?
Yeah, so for us, we are saying African philanthropy is everyone's agenda.
Okay.
In fact, our entry point is at the level of reclaiming the narrative. where sometimes people have thought of philanthropy as being the preserve of those with a lot of money who then decide that they want to give, they create structures and systems, and then they find a cause and then they give. But we are saying, when you look at it, African philanthropy, everyone is a giver. People give of their time, their talent, of course, their treasure. So everyone is a giver. There are networks.
That's true.
So we are really promoting that notion of recognizing and appreciating the giving that is embedded in our African communities and society. In fact, community itself, you can't talk of community without reciprocity and mutuality.
That is true. That is true. Yeah.
And people giving to each other. So we are building our a narrative of African philanthropy from that level, and really seeking to infuse that understanding and knowledge into shaping global philanthropy.
Okay.
Because we believe that if we anchor on these timeless values like reciprocity, mutuality, community, solidarity, Ubuntu, I am because you are, we will be able to do good better.
Oh, fantastic.
Our giving will have greater lasting impact, and our giving will also be affirming of human dignity, and our giving will take us closer to the vision of a more just society.
Wow, that's phenomenal. Yeah. Thank you very much. All right, everybody, the crew, everyone, thank you very much, and see you next time, next year.
Next year, the 6th African Philanthropy Conference.
There we go. Cheers. So guess what? Come at the hour, come at the man. And we have Professor Becky. We've spoken to so many people, and everybody kept on saying, you need to speak to Professor Becky, or this is the idea. He is the idea man behind this conference. These are the things that he has done. So, the work that you've done precedes you. So well done to that. So welcome to Friday Drinks. And what we actually do here is we have a drink, a tipple for you guys. I don't drink, so I'll have my water. And maybe you can just give us a bit of background on what you're actually having and why you're having it.
Okay, I was looking at my watch. It's actually just close to Friday. Yeah. It's almost Friday. So thank you so much for having me on your show. Okay. So should I name the
Yeah.
drink?
Go ahead. Yeah.
Okay, so I think for this conversation, I'm just going to be a double black, but I won't walk alone. I will walk with others.
Is this your usual drink?
I'm a whiskey guy.
Okay.
I collect whiskey as I travel throughout the world.
Really?
And the reason why I do that is because, there's a friend of mine who is just sitting there who introduced me to an inclusive bar. And the inclusive bar is central in most of the democratic processes that have unfolded in the Zimbabwean space. And a lot of conversations, including part of what we're going to talk about today, have had a space in the inclusive bar. And if you go to the inclusive bar, you realize that there are all sorts of whiskies, fine whiskies. And those whiskies are collected at each and every moment of our travels. And I've also done the same. When I travel, I collect
So
whiskey.
you're a proper connoisseur.
I wouldn't call myself that, but I know that I collect good whiskies. But collection is an interesting
So
term.
tell us your best, or some of the top whiskeys that you collected, or that you've had to partake in.
Of course.
Because our audience actually loves this. Is you may not have watched Friday Drinks, but Rufaro is our resident connoisseur.
Yeah.
And we know that we have a legion of people who watch the show for 5 minutes when Rufaro is talking, and then they switch off.
Yeah.
So maybe today you can actually give us a glimpse of whiskey and why you like it, and where the interest actually
Yeah,
stem from.
I mean, so I love single malts because the next day I'm feeling still okay, still fresh. But if I were to single out, I would probably say a Jameson barrel. But also I like a Bowman, very good Scottish whiskey. But I collect a lot, and I mean Japanese, all sorts of whiskies. Each country that I go to, I collect a
So
whiskey.
you should come to our studio, and I'm pretty sure you'll have fun with Farah.
Yeah, definitely. I
You
mean,
guys are kindred spirits.
I don't drink to the extent where I lose my control, but I actually do enjoy a glass of whiskey.
Okay.
I really do enjoy a glass of whiskey because I think I respect the craft around how it is processed to the point where it gets to my bar and I take my time to go to my bar to actually serve myself a drink. So the reality about drinks is that when you have a lot in abundance, you actually don't crave for it. So you actually become a responsible drinker. But when you don't have things in abundance,
You gulp.
you gulp. Right? So that's the reality. But we will have to bring this back to the conversation
All right.
about why when we travel in different airports, we use temporariness to deal with things that are so dear and so essential for our lives. You are in an airport for a very specific time. And that specific time is so crucial, but you take a decision that is so essential for your life. And part of it is just going into a bar or a duty-free shop and selecting the best whiskey that you are going to take home. And chances are you will not open it for a number of months. And when you get to it, you're going to really enjoy that glass.
So it reignites or it rekindles the memory of the particular trip or
Yeah, so it's about...
a particular epoch or moments in your life.
Yes.
What is it?
So the best way I can put it that it's about you realizing that as you travel, you are collecting. And when you get home and you are beginning to drink, you are connecting. So in life, you must collect dots. And then you get to a point where you connect them. With drinks, you collect as you travel. But as you are collecting, you don't drink it at the moment. You collect,
build your memory
and
bank.
then you build your memory. And then at some point when you are just sitting there enjoying your drink, your glass, you start connecting the dots. That's what it's all about. Collecting and
Ladies
connecting.
and gentlemen, I think we actually have a philosopher in the house, which helps us then to connect the dots.
Yeah.
Because the reason why we're here is because of you. So would you like to just tell us a little bit more about the philanthropic work in Africa, the conference itself, and what you had at the business school, which is really tied in with philanthropy.
Yeah.
So training business leaders, but making them also aware of their philanthropic responsibilities.
Yeah. So again, I want to go back to what I was saying about collecting and connecting, because early on, and I think if you speak to so many people who are in this field, they will probably refer to something that they see as a calling. And that calling may not be necessarily obvious to you at that moment in time, but a couple of years down the line, you realize you are here for a purpose. And that purpose can be a calling in one form or the other. In my case, early on, my mother wanted me to become a Roman Catholic priest. I thought it was a good idea. I actually went as far as going to a seminary.
Okay.
All the way to the first year theology. But at that point, I started realizing this is not practical. This is not sustainable. And I left the seminary to pursue other things. It was only when I was working for Trust Africa, which is where Briggs and colleagues are, and we're implementing a project on religion, that I realized that I was still in the journey of becoming a priest But this time it was not a Catholic priest. This time it was a philanthropic priest. Because I realized my calling was really to study, research, promote, and expose the vision of African philanthropy to the world. Because I realized that even though there was a field called philanthropy, a discipline called philanthropy, that discipline was only available in the global north. And there was nothing in Africa formally called a discipline in philanthropy. But our lives were wrapped around giving and sharing.
Okay.
And so the world had decided to create a hierarchy in terms of different philanthropy. So you have your American philanthropy, European philanthropy, Asian, etc. And then somewhere below there is the African philanthropy. And I thought, wait a minute. I actually think that our philanthropies exist universally at the same level. It's just that we have not documented it ourselves, we have not promoted it ourselves, and we have not advocated for its equality with other forms of philanthropies. And so that's where the journey really started. And that's why I talk about myself being a priest in the philanthropic space.
So with a religion in mind, and this is quite interesting because while you were talking, I was thinking that when we look at priests, I want to know from your perspective, are you an evangelist? Are you a prophet? Are you a pastor? Are you a teacher in the philanthropic realm?
Yeah. So without sounding a bit arrogant, I actually think there's a component of each of those in me, but also with other colleagues that I've worked with. Why am I saying that? Because, you know, evangelism means you are really trying to convert others into the space. And I think that a lot of the work that myself and other colleagues in different institutions, the work that I did at Trust Africa, when I started working there, so one of the first books on African philanthropy was done at Trust Africa. It's called Giving to Help and Helping to Give. It's the first book that we developed in the continent, supported by the Ford Foundation, developed and, you know, framed within the framework of Trust Africa, where we brought researchers from different, you know, disciplines, and we took them to different international platforms so that they are able to meet with seasoned scholars and researchers to really come up with solid chapters that would stand the test of time. One of the challenges about African writing and researchers is that you can easily be dismissed by the global publishers, either because they say the quality of the work is poor, or you have not done primary research, and that's what sells. And most journals pride themselves by rejecting a lot of articles. So the higher the rejection rate, the better the journal.
Yeah.
And so most
More
African
prestigious,
researchers, most African researchers get rejected because of that. And so we decided we're going to be very determined and disciplined about developing African researchers. And so the book that I'm talking about was a process where we were actually bringing African researchers through Trust Africa framework to come to different international conferences, especially the International Society for Third Sector Research. And I think we did about 3 or 4 of those sessions over a period of about 4 or 5 years.
Oh, wow.
And then we published the book. And that book became one of the first solid, researched, primary-based books on African philanthropy. So that's part of evangelism, to convert the global north and everyone else who is focused on, in a way, disadvantaging African philanthropy, to then take a look at what the data is saying, and then you change mindsets, you change the heart. So that's one form.
Okay.
But there's also a part around, you talk about prophecy, which is you set your mind right into the future, and then instead of reasoning forward, you reason backwards. In most cases, most people fail because they are reasoning forward. Instead, you must walk to the future, and then you reason backwards. Because if you start by reasoning forward, it means you are doing trial and testing and all that. But if you go to the future and you come back, then you're asking yourself, I've been there, so how do I get there? So that's what we have also been doing with philanthropy, to project what the future would look like, and then we begin to walk there. And how have we walked there? We have walked there by establishing academic programs. So now at CAPSI, as you probably know now, we've got programs that deal with teaching of philanthropy in the continent. For the first time ever, we are teaching philanthropy. It has always been taught in the global north, but not in Africa. Imagine how old Africa is, and there's never been a single university teaching something that we are born with.
It's embedded in us. Yeah.
Before you are born, you are a philanthropist. The naming ceremony, when you are named, there's a whole lot of philanthropy that is involved. As you grow up, you are both a recipient and a philanthropist yourself. When you die, you are the biggest philanthropist, right?
Yes.
That is ingrained in who we are. But guess what? We have never thought of teaching that. We have taught everything else, including European history, whatever, which has no relevance to our day-to-day living. But that which is embedded in our DNA, we have not taught it. So that was one of the things that we wanted to do. So we are doing this prophetic thing by teaching. But we are doing prophetic things by also doing research. So lack of data is actually a problem in our side, because if you don't have data, then how do you set policies? How do you take informed decisions? How do you even think about the future? So research becomes important. So as part of prophecy, you project into the future by interpreting the landscape. So again, we do research. But we also do these convenings, which is part of what we are doing here. We are here in Victoria Falls because we realize the power of bringing everybody together to set agendas for the future.
Absolutely.
But also to share best practices, and also to find time to just lament on the challenges that we are all facing. And I don't know about the pastor side of things, but I actually think that you cannot be in the philanthropic space and not share in all of those components that
and mentoring.
And mentoring, of course, we've got students here that some of them have graduated with their PhDs, masters. Some are already, registered for their.
Okay. So let me call you Prophet Becky, right? And what I want to do.
I'm not so sure about that. That prophet title seems to be problematic, especially in this country.
We're having a drink. It's close to 12 midnight. It's close to midnight.
Yeah.
So we can indulge.
Sure.
But what I'm trying to do is let's project 2050.
Sure.
What will it look like? Sure. What will philanthropy in Africa actually look like?
Yeah.
So maybe cast your net out there and help us as an audience to say, you know what, guys, this is what we're seeing.
Yeah.
These are the themes. This is what we're projecting.
I don't know what your culture says, but culturally in my space, a drink, especially a alcoholic drink, is one instrument that you use to actually speak to the ancestors. So you use a drink to do some kind of
Can you use
ritual.
Johnny Walker?
I think a drink is a drink, I think a drink is a drink.
Okay.
We've been so brainwashed to actually believe that there's something traditional and there's something modern. And what climate change, COVID has taught us is that the things that were considered traditional are actually the things that are very much advanced. And so I really don't think that I would have a problem using John Walker to speak to my ancestors. After all, it comes from the very labor that is done by my ancestors. So I won't have a problem. But the reason I was saying that is because you actually use alcohol or spirited stuff to open up the avenues and access to the future. And so if we are to use this now and look at the future, I would actually think that one of the things that I see in the future is that we definitely have to contend with the current existential issues, one of them being the climate change challenge. There's no doubt that if we thought that COVID was a problem, climate change is actually a catastrophe. We have to worry about it because it affects everybody. Everybody, whether you like it or not, is one thing that we must deal with. So I think philanthropy has to immediately and urgently deal with the issues that are related to climate change, but not just focusing narrowly on climate change, but focusing on the broader issues around resource governance, issues around conservation, issues around mitigation, etc. Because at the end of the day, climate change is just a symptom of other factors around it. Today, we're speaking about the just transition journey for most countries that are dependent on fossil fuels and others. But that on its own is not enough to address the bigger problem. And so my sense is that philanthropy will be irrelevant if it doesn't deal with issues that are broadly dealing with issues of resource governance. And we have groups that are already working on that. In Zimbabwe, you have your ZELAS, your Zimbabwe Environmental Lawyers Association, which for a couple of years, I think have been focusing on this issue. And there are many others. So I think that's important to deal with the issues of climate change, the environment, issues that have to do with resources and how we govern them. Because how we govern resources has an impact on how the climate question is dealt with. And we have seen in the last couple of years a bit of a rise in the investments on climate change. But prior to this, globally, the only 2% of funding was going to climate change, which is really.
So that's really where your prophecy
is. Yeah, we have to.
We're going to see more and more funding.
There'll be more and more funding going into that.
But in ecosystems that are sustainable.
Yeah. So I think when you look at the entirety of climate change question, you have to understand that it actually is interdisciplinary. You can't talk about climate change without thinking about infrastructure.
That's true.
So, for example, in the couple of years, we had a big drought here in Zimbabwe, and that drought caused a lot of damage to infrastructure. And so you could not travel from Harare to Mutare, for example, because of the damage that was caused by a consequence of climate change related factors. At the same time, climate change has an impact on nutrition, on food security. Climate change has an impact on education, etc. So if you just look at climate change alone,
for my slower mind, because I think I'm getting what you're saying, but I have a slow mind, so just dumb it down a little bit. You're looking at, so for example, malnutrition. Malnutrition will have a problem with our kids, because if there's a drought, then it means that we cannot feed our and if we can't feed our kids, then that's a problem, because the kids are the next generation.
Yeah, but look at it as a spectrum. So if you don't feed your children, they suffer from malnutrition. It means they also cannot study very well.
Stunted growth.
They're stunted. A hungry child cannot study. If they cannot study and they're not educated, then it means they're not going to have a proper access to proper jobs. They're not employed. So financial inclusion becomes a problem. Poverty, inequality increases, right? So when you look at climate change, it's got such an interdisciplinary effect. And that's one key thing that I think is very important. And yet we have very practical examples to demonstrate that. But I think the second, and this morning's session on AI was very, very crucial. I think the second is, just to think about, where the world is going. And for a number of years, we're all thinking that, this issue of the fourth industrial revolution and many others, it may not happen to us. We're in Africa and all of that. But as we can see now, Africa is actually the most fastest growing region where AI is likely to have a
greatest impact.
And greatest impact. Our youth and our young people all own smartphones, and they use them for good or for bad. But AI is just here to help us, but also
to
actually
disrupt.
destroy and disrupt things. So we have to think about the ethics and the morality of AI. So when we deploy AI, what are we deploying it for? Is it for the public good, or we are deploying it for other things? And I think the session in the morning spoke highly to that. So I think there's no industry or sector of our life that is not going to be affected by AI. So it's not a question of if, it's a question of when.
Okay.
And when that time comes, we must be ready. But readiness requires investments. And so philanthropy now has to think about investing.
Okay, so it will breach that
and
gap.
creating that gap and the bridge between where we are and where we ought to be. And I think that that's something that we really need to think about. And businesses are quick to catch on some of these sexy subjects because they are able to bring the investments, but also the revenues that are needed. So if you looked at COVID, all the tech companies actually benefited from that crisis. And instead of then using that moment to then build the capacity of everyone to pivot to a world where we are all driven by AI, and we are changing our skill set and training our young people to adopting that. So for example, all of you here, I see that guy is a photographer. His job is to manage that camera or those cameras. But think of it, in the next 5-10 years, think of it, he will not be needed to stand there.
You'll be out of a job.
He will actually be needed to drive to pilot a drone. His job will be to pilot a drone. And if he pivots from a photographer to a drone pilot, what does that mean? It means he can actually be piloting a drone to do what we are doing right now from an aerial perspective, and whatever.
So bring more
angles,
dimensions. So
and more
instead
dimensions,
of 2-dimension becomes 3-dimensional, 4-dimensional, 5-dimensions.
Right? But it also means that he can also be a reliable and an effective person in lighting streets. He can now be a pilot of a drone that is lighting streets, mapping the streets, scoping the surrounding. But it can also be a drone that is delivering medicines. In Rwanda, medicines are being delivered from one clinic to the other.
Okay.
So from a photographer to a drone pilot.
Okay.
Right?
That's how it's just evolving. Okay.
But philanthropy has to invest in those things. So you asked me about how did we end up here? We ended up here because we realized that we needed a collective space where all of us come together to think about the different things that we are dealing with in our institutions, in our associations, in our memberships, but come to a collective space where we actually shed off of our personal interests, institutional interests, and collectively say what are the issues and the agenda of the African continent. So in 2019 was our first conference that we actually hosted at the Wits Business School. And then 2020 there was COVID, nothing happened. 2021 we did a virtual conference, and we actually focused on the effect of COVID. 2022 we were worried that after COVID, systems were affected and most of them were actually outdated. They were not responding to the after effects of COVID. And so we focused on systems change. 2023, we said, okay, after systems of change, where is philanthropy? Philanthropy was at an inflection point. Lots of global developments, lots of challenges. How was philanthropy responding? And our analysis at the point was that philanthropy is at a crossroads, is at an inflection point. And so that's what we did in Dakar, in Sali. We were focusing on the dimensions of philanthropy at an inflection point. And then, of course, this year we realized that after an inflation, you need to think about the next frontier.
Okay.
And that's why this conference today is focusing on the next frontier. And that's the priesthood that we're talking about.
Fantastic. So, the crew is telling me that we're almost done.
Yeah.
And, how does one actually engage philanthropy? How can one become part of the bandwagon, so to speak. And here I want you to directly address the diaspora.
Yeah.
So a lot of people have been talking about how the locals and everybody can engage in your conferences, but maybe speak directly to the diaspora and how the diaspora can also reimagine themselves and also integrate into the philanthropic work that's happening in Africa.
Yeah, so I think it's important to start by saying that everyone is a philanthropist. Everybody. So there's this notion that philanthropists are rich people. Everybody is a philanthropist. In fact, you'll be shocked to know that the poor give more than the rich. The poor give more than the rich. So if you look at the totality of what you give as a poor person, you should probably give 98% of what you have. And the rich person gives 0.9 or 1% of what they have.
And it's tax deductible.
So the reality is that all of us are philanthropists and we all give. It's important to emphasize that people don't shy away from actually giving, right?
Yeah.
And then the second thing, talking to how people can engage, especially for the diaspora. So firstly, the African Union defines the diaspora as the sixth region of Africa. So that essentially makes the diaspora African. But secondly, when we think about philanthropy, especially in this continent, there are three ways of looking at it. There's African philanthropy. So this is something that is happening in the continent by Africans for Africans. But there's philanthropy in Africa, which is philanthropy that is in Africa, but potentially and probably coming from outside. And then there's philanthropy with African features. And this is philanthropy that is not geographically located in Africa, it's elsewhere, but its features are exactly the same as that which is in Africa. So you go to Brazil, you go to the Caribbean, you go to the African Americans, etc. If you look at their philanthropy, it's exactly the same as what we do. So if you use that framework, then the diaspora immediately becomes an essential player in African philanthropy, because they have no choice but to be that form of philanthropy that is African features. But secondly, they are that philanthropy that is in Africa. And thirdly, because of historical origins of the people who are in the diaspora, they are African philanthropy. So how do they engage? There are different mechanisms. Some of them engage through hometown associations.
Yes.
If you look at Cameroon, you look at India and others, how they send money back to their communities and how they develop their communities, they use an instrument of hometown associations.
Yes.
Some use foundations. So India, American Foundation, for example, you use a foundation, you collect resources wherever you are based, and then through a foundation, you give towards a developmental project in your country. Others is through remittances. And normally we don't count remittances as part of philanthropy, but actually when you look at them, they are actually part of philanthropy. And in most of our countries, and in Zimbabwe specifically, remittances are actually more than the overseas development assistance.
That's true.
So already philanthropy from the diaspora is making huge impacts in the country. So there are different instruments that we can use. But my point really was to say, there's no doubt and there's not even a question to even start asking the diaspora to be involved. They are already engaged using the different frameworks that I've just talked about.
No, fantastic. Thank you very much for that. I thoroughly enjoyed this. You guys are doing phenomenal work. And, I look forward to a whole lot more that you're doing. And your prophecy will keep tabs on it, and we'll always remind you. Yeah. And we'll viewers, you will be able to see this continuously. It will be on YouTube. So if you revise it, just know that there's a place in which we can hold you to account. So I'm looking forward to this. So Prof, thank you very much for doing this. It's phenomenal work, and I'm glad that you're able to be recognized for the work that you're doing. And we look forward to the next year.
Yeah, thank you so much. I wanted to say, I actually have my own podcast.
Oh, really?
Conversations on African philanthropy. So I normally do the interviews. This is the first time I'm being interviewed on a podcast. But thank you so much.
How is it?
But thank you so much for having me.
Okay.
I think this has been great. It's late into the night, but like I said, we know with some alcoholic drinks, it's a journey towards the future. It's a journey to connect with the ancestors, and ancestors generally don't lead us wrong. So I think we are on the right track.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
you.
And
Thank
to everybody, enjoy your weekend. And I can certainly tell you that it's still early morning here, and we'll be at it.
Thank you.
Cheers.